Loom is probably the most important business enablement tool of the last 5 years, certainly in my experience. It's a very simple tool, which is it's a low friction way to record your screen and in some sort of an async message. You have a picture of yourself, you can record your screen, and it is really easy to record a Loom.
And it is ready to share
Yeah.
pretty much instantaneously when you finish recording. So there's no lag time for uploading something to a sharing service.
Totally. And what's interesting about using this sort of tool is that anything that is in the form of content scales effectively infinitely in a way that in-person time or phone calls do not. Content scales, time does not. It's pretty simple calculation. But what's interesting is there's a mental shift that needs to happen for people where it reminds me of in the early days of radio. You maybe know some of the history of this, of the first radio programs were just theater plays read out loud on the radio because they didn't know what to do with this new medium. It made no sense. And then eventually they figured out, instead of copying our old ways, we can create new patterns that amplify this even more. And I think this is where we are with a lot of these remote work tools. So whereas in the past, pair programming was you have to, two people sit behind each other and you watch each other code and you talk and you're doing it at the same time. Or you have a really good programmer who's just doing his normal workflow, recording on a Loom, and he's just narrating what he's thinking while he's doing it. And then the other person can watch it at 2.5x. They can pause it. They can rewind. They can take notes. You don't have to do this live. It's a piece of content. And then every engineer at your company forever into the future can see this same piece of content. And so there was a really interesting example recently where I shared something with somebody externally, and they were commenting on like, well, this is a failure because only 40 people watched this. And I said, this was an internal meeting. Could you imagine, like, if we had an internal meeting with 40 people in it, you would say, like, that was a lot of information being transmitted. But there's this cognitive thing of like, well, if it's a piece of content, it needs to get like 1 million views or it's a failure.
Right.
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, if you're open to saying,
yeah.
I mean, you're open to saying a lot, but I understand if it's not everything. What was the Loom of the 40-person meeting that was shared externally, or why was it shared externally?
The Loom that was shared was one of our Friday forums.
Mm-hmm.
It was
What is a Friday forum?
Oh, sorry, that's our team all hands. We do it every week on Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
And
how large is the team now?
The team's 40, 50 people.
40, 50 people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so many people show up live, so they don't watch the recording. So that's fine. And then some people watch it after the fact. And so we also have a number of all of our memos. We also use Notion pretty religiously. Once you learn how to use the Notion database features, they're actually extremely powerful in the amount of leverage you can get from it. And all of our memos have a summary Loom at the top, any sort of meaningful memo. And so somebody will do a 5-minute walkthrough of something that they wrote, and many people just watch those Looms. So that's another thing where people can share.
I really feel, and I have doubled, tripled, quadrupled my use of Loom. I have a couple of specific questions. Where have people been doubtful employees of using Loom? And I think you gave me, and we can always clip anything out of this interview, right? But an example of a videographer, a video editor at one point, which I think is a good example. So maybe you could give that. And how do you make these easily searchable and findable? Because what I find is I use Loom most often in a one-off capacity, say running through a Google Doc, and I don't want to add 75 different comments. So I will use that as a way to give my verbal feedback and next actions. Saves a ton of time, or at least a ton of my time. And so I'd love to know perhaps some use cases which will challenge what people might perceive as what is possible or not possible with a tool like Loom. And then I'd love for you to say a little bit more about why you use Notion instead of other options, like what the use case is predominantly. And I'm speaking as someone who doesn't really use databases. I don't really use spreadsheets much. I probably should, but I just don't at this point.
I think one of the things with Loom, part of the assumption is that one of the rules that we really try to push people for is only ever do one take. Just do one take. Because so many people, when they start using it as a tool, they stumble and say, oh man, I have to re-record it. And they'll do 8 takes for something that really did not need to be. And so we really try to push people towards, if you were in a meeting and you stumbled over your words, nobody would care.
Mm-hmm.
And they also don't care that you did it in a loom. So just relax. It's fine. A lot of my looms, I have like multiple minutes in a row of pausing, of just thinking, what would I do here? And then in people's minds, it's like, oh my God, this is so uncomfortable. I'm on a recording and there's this empty space. You know, what are they going to be thinking?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a meeting, that would be totally normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we do during our onboarding, I believe it's now week 3 of our 1-month onboarding for new employees, is the entire week, 3rd week, is async week, where you are only allowed to do verbal and video recordings for communication. You're not allowed to write anything. You're not allowed to type anything. So if you want to say, hey, great job, you have to record an audio note and you have to send that. Or you have to do a loom of yourself saying, hey, that was good work. Thank you. And then that's it. And just get used to that.
How do they send the audio note?
So Loom also has an audio feature.
I see, audio only.
Yeah, I think it might only be on mobile, but you can do an audio note on Loom mobile. And yeah, it's really, really uncomfortable for people. This is why the forcing function was, we had to make this part of onboarding because it was so strange for almost everybody.
So what would you say to folks, and then maybe we'll talk about the video example as another training tool.
Mm-hmm.
But what would you say to people who have the visceral reaction of, I'm very fast at reading, video and audio memos are really slow? And I saw this meme going around with this guy standing on a street corner with this big sign over his head, sort of like someone who would ask for money, but it said, no, I will not listen to your 3-minute voice memo. So how would you address that concern that this is just going to end up taking more time during, let's say, an async week? And maybe that's okay because you're really just trying to force people to get used to working asynchronously. But what are your thoughts?
I mean, that's definitely the case. There's no perfect medium. The medium matters depending on the message that you're trying to communicate. And so long form memos should be in writing because you're going to skip over, you're going to find the parts that are relevant. Writing is a tool for thought. And doing these audio notes is a different tool to convey different types of information. And so I think the short answer is you should use the right tool for the job. A lot of people find that what they use Loom for would be, instead of sitting down at a blank piece of paper, they just record themselves with whatever thoughts they have for what will go into it. They send that to their EA, which maybe today would be ChatGPT, but they send it to their EA who outlines it. And then it's a lot less painful to come into a at least partially outlined piece of work rather than starting from a blank page.
Yeah, the blinking cursor.
Yeah.
All right. Would you mind describing, since I've teased it excessively now, but the video editing example, and then how you make things searchable? Because, for instance, I have a very small team, but at one point I was curious as to how people were currently tracking tasks and projects.
Yeah.
Because people have a good amount of flexibility and there are pros and cons to that. We have used a lot of, say, Asana in the past, but some employees work differently and have different approaches. So I wanted them to capture a loom of their flow. And if you were to ask me right now, gun against the head, you have to find all of those looms within the next 30 minutes, I would be concerned for my safety. Right? I might not find them. So the video example, and then how you organize things or naming conventions, maybe, I have no idea. Organize these looms such that you can find them later.
So one of the things I would say is that I probably record, in fact, I know this statistic, I probably average about 10 to 20 looms per day I record. And to be perfectly honest, I maybe share half of them. A lot of them, I just turn it on because maybe I'll want to use that information. It is costless to record a loom. And so if nothing happens, then nothing happens. It costs nothing. It costs me nothing to record it. It costs me nothing to not share it. The searchability, it has not been an issue for at least the looms that I record, because they tend not to be things that I would come back to. They're more in the moment things.
Yeah.
I would be willing to bet, though, that over the course of the next maybe 6 to 12 months, that as these AI tools continue to get better, search is the most obvious use case for this.
And as far as I can tell, in the last, I don't know when this started, maybe month or two, Loom has already begun to auto title your videos based on, I assume, I'm not sure if it's AI, but some type of transcript. Exactly.
Yeah. And so there will be a point in the future where you can say, hey, can you find me that video that I did with this specific person where we talked about this? And it'll definitely be able to find it.
Yeah.
So I think some of that will just be solved.
So my laziness has a shelf life.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, the technology will catch up and solve my lack of process. I'm excited.
Exactly. But I will say on the other side, which is the searchability for the recording of tasks. So this is what we use Notion databases for. So our EAs, every process that they do for somebody on our team has its own dedicated page in Notion. And that page has a linked database to a much larger database, which is all tasks that any EA has done for us. And you can connect those two together. There's something called a relation, and you can relate those together, and you can create a subview within that. So imagine you have a task that's a recurring task, task A. At the bottom, you can create a linked database that filters only for tasks that are related to that. And so in each of those entries, the EA will include a link to the Loom of the date that they did the thing. And so if you want to see when's the last time somebody did this task, you can go to that specific task page and you can see, oh, they did it April 26th. They did it March 3rd. And you can see each time they did it, and you can click on the recording and you can just watch them do it. And this is most useful for one, it's just knowing that it's there. If you say, hey, did that get sent?
Yeah, there's proof of work.
Proof of work. Did that get sent last week? You can go there, you can see that it is, and it's just reassuring to not have to reach out to them and make sure. The other is whenever there's a bug in the process, where this happens often, somebody gets a message, you're like, that's weird, because why would they get that? You can look at the process and you can see, oh, because they pulled the information from here and they didn't know that I was actually communicating with them over here. So they thought it was one of these kinds. And so you can just say, hey, I saw that you did this, not a big deal, but next time check both of these sources and see which one's most recent. And then they update the process and you don't have those issues, as opposed to just ambiguously having it fail and not knowing why.
Yeah. Easier to debug.
Yeah.
Video.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So there's so many good examples of this.
And I'm open to more examples. We're not in a rush. Yeah.
There are so many good examples. So one of the specific tactical things that I always recommend for people for getting better at delegating is just workflow recording. And this is really as simple as when you sit at your computer, turn on a Loom, and then that's it. Just do your normal work. And the specific example was Tony, who runs multimedia for us. He was doing a lot of video editing, and Josh, who does our Friday forums as well. They do this whole process of video editing, of creating the slides, and almost everybody in their own role says, nobody else could do this. It's way too complicated. You have to pull from here, you got to pull from there. And I think almost everybody overestimates the complexity of these tasks. It's really just pattern matching. And if you record your workflow doing that.
True for most tasks.
Yeah, it's true for most tasks. Like for multimedia, he was saying, well, how are they going to know what 5 items from this interview are the most interesting? How are they going to know that? And then how are they going to know to edit and cut those in this particular way? And then it turns out you record yourself doing that 2 or 3 times, and then an EA can replicate that with 90% accuracy.
And this is with some type of casual running commentary.
Yeah. Sometimes not even. It's just doing it, and they can just see what you're doing. Okay, well, he went to this place, he went to that place. Almost everybody that does this is surprised at how quickly somebody can match whatever pattern it is that you're doing. And there's a lot less secret knowledge than people expect.